In the 1890s, Edgar Degas was on a mission to find, acquire, and piece together some parts of a lost painting. This is how a fragmented Édouard Manet painting would turn into an accidental masterpiece. Édouard Manet painted some of the most recognizable paintings in art history, most of which I constantly mention or have made a video about on this channel. However, my favorite work by Manet was made surprisingly by accident, and it's one of his many iterations of an event that happened on June 19, 1867. It would take 2 years and 4 different canvases, the biggest canvases Manet had ever worked on, to depict this very event. Let's take a look at Manet's execution of Emperor Maximilian. But before we do, I'd like to thank everybody for helping this channel reach 20,000 subscribers, and to celebrate, I'd like to do a Q&A. I already did a Q&A for the 10,000 subscriber milestone, and I really enjoyed making it, so if you have any questions, make sure to write them down in the comment section. Also, if you're feeling generous, there's this new feature on YouTube called Super Thanks, which enables you to throw a couple of bucks to your favorite creators to support them. Eventually, I'd like to make these videos full-time, so if you feel like this content is worth it, please Super Thanks it, and I'll thank you back by shouting you out in the next video. Now, back to this video. In May of 1864, Maximilian I, Archduke of Austria, arrived in Mexico reluctantly. The Emperor of France, Napoleon III, convinced him to be his puppet emperor in the Second Mexican Empire. However, as you may imagine, Mexicans weren't too fond of having a foreign monarch leading them, so after much political turmoil and resistance led by Benito Juarez, Napoleon retreated many of his troops from Mexico in 1866, 2 years after Maximilian had arrived. The French emperor would then try to convince Maximilian to leave and retreat to France, a proposal he refused. In May 1867, 3 years after his arrival, Maximilian was captured, and on June 19th, he was executed alongside 2 generals. So this made for some newsworthy drama at the time. The Emperor of France made Maximilian the Emperor of Mexico to then abandon him and ask him to leave. In a plot twist, Maximilian wanted to stay, abandoned by the man who gave him power, and got executed. This was a defeat for both emperors and a victory for the Mexican Republicans and arguably the French Republicans as well, who could now point out Napoleon's incompetence. One of these French Republicans was Édouard Manet, and he definitely wouldn't skip out on the opportunity to highlight this tragic event to the world through one of his paintings. Manet was already famous, or at least infamous, at the time. Both his Déjeuner sur l'herbe and his Olympia had already been subjects of many heated conversations in the art world. However, if his next painting was to be controversial, it wouldn't be because it would depict nudity in a way aristocrats didn't like, or because it was painted in a way aristocrats didn't like, but because of the political nature of the work. He took up a 2.6 meter wide canvas and, with great difficulty, made his first painting. He didn't know the features of the Mexican Republicans and decided to give them sombreros, which they weren't actually wearing. Manet wanted to accurately depict the scene, and information was pretty hard to get by, especially considering the information about that specific event was heavily censored by the emperor for obvious reasons. Manet was not satisfied with that painting, so after many tries and sketches, he finally completed this one in 1869. The information is a lot more clear than his first try. You actually see the firing squad, their uniform which resembled a lot like the French uniforms. You see a crowd of bystanders, a stone wall against which the victims were executed, and, finally, the victims themselves. If you've seen some of my other videos on this channel, then you might recognize this composition. The 3rd of May 1808 by Francisco Goya heavily influenced it, and its composition is still as strong in Manet's painting. This composition hides the executioners' faces as they all turn their backs to us. They also lose all individuality as they all wear the same uniform, diluting the responsibility of the murder they're carrying out. However, there are many elements differentiating both paintings, the most obvious being that one is in broad daylight and the other is at night. One has a pile of dead bodies, the other doesn't. Goya's composition is more dramatic in its lighting and in its graphic details, but Manet's composition has an element which Goya didn't include: the soldier on the right. It's the only soldier we can identify, and it's the soldier who will deliver the coup de grace being the finishing strike in case the execution didn't work the first time. The reason why we can identify this soldier and not the others is not a coincidence. Manet made this executioner look strangely like the Emperor of France himself, Napoleon III.
All of this is great, but this final version of the painting is by far my least favorite. If anything, I find it kind of boring.
The version I prefer stands between the first and the last one. Manet gave up on this version, and I'm glad he did because this abandonment made it my favorite Manet painting. This version of the execution of Maximilian was cut up to become separate individual works of art. Some parts were lost, some were damaged, but after Manet's death, Edgar Degas reunited these 4 pieces together. This is the result, and somehow this incomplete painting is the most captivating of the series. By positioning only some of the fragments back together, Degas or Manet accidentally created a work of art of its own. This has always been seen or considered like a pieced-up lost work of Manet, but I believe it's much more than that.
I believe we can better appreciate this work by considering it not as the remnants of a lost work of art, but as a work of art in itself. It's creating a whole new way of narrativizing a painting or a situation.
The different elements are all framed for us like different scenes from a movie. This was certainly not the intention, but Manet or Degas is zooming in on different aspects of the situation, starting with an establishing shot of a group of soldiers to then show close-up shots of the coup de grace soldier, of one of the generals, and finally Maximilian's hand. Then these close-up shots are collaged together and tell a story. This is all accidental, of course, but these accidents are what allow the viewer to be engaged with the painting. For example, this painting, which depicts the execution of Emperor Maximilian, doesn't show the emperor. All we see of him is his hand clutching his general's hand. We don't see the emperor anymore. He's dead. All that's left is an image of his hand holding on to dear life. The omission of such information wasn't a choice, but that doesn't really matter. The painting still resonates with us. If anything, I'm more compelled by the narrative Manet's depicting in this composition than in his final one.
Without wanting to, Manet, with the help of Degas, created a masterpiece, not by showing the whole scene, but by showing pieces of it, giving to the composition a rhythm and a tension that you'd expect to feel during an execution.
The moment being so fast, so traumatic that you'd only recollect some pieces of it, some glimpses, some fragments of images frozen in time. That's clearly not what Manet intended, but that's the effect it has on me, and perhaps, in some cases, it's the effect of a painting, not its intent, that makes it a masterpiece.
Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for helping this channel reach 20,000 subscribers. And if you have any questions for the upcoming Q&A, you can ask them in the comments. If you want to support the channel, you can go on patreon.com/thecanvas or super thank this video for me to thank you back in the next video. Thank you and see you next time.